The moment you smiled, the system glitched, not because it was broken, but because it met something it couldn't measure. They didn't expect you to notice the eyes behind the curtain. You weren't supposed to see the way the room shifted when you walked in, or how conversation suddenly got coded the moment your intuition turned its head. You were never meant to realize that the world has watchers, not just in satellites and screens, but in souls that can't look away from light they don't understand. Here's the twist. Studies show humans can feel when they're being watched, even without seeing it. Our brains are wired to detect unseen attention. It's ancient survival tech, baked into human DNA. But what happens when your consciousness evolves beyond instinct? When your awareness itself becomes the radar? That's when your perception stops being biological and starts being spiritual. And that's exactly what happened with you. You didn't notice by accident. You decoded something. You saw what wasn't meant to be seen, and that awareness flipped a hidden switch in the unseen realm. Suddenly, your smile wasn't just joy. It was a broadcast signal. It sent vibrations that scrambled data, confused intentions, and triggered awakenings in places that thrive on secrecy. The funniest part, you didn't even try. You weren't meditating on a mountain or performing some mystical ritual. You were just being yourself, smiling, existing, radiating. And yet, that effortless moment caused more disruption in the unseen than 1,000 truth bombs on the internet. So, buckle up, because this isn't just another story about intuition or being watched. This is about what happens when divine awareness looks back and smiles. Number 1. Your awareness was never an accident. You weren't supposed to catch them watching, but the divine part of you did. Awareness has always been your hidden armor, the kind that doesn't need confrontation to expose truth. The moment you realized something was off, something watching, something tracking, it wasn't paranoia. It was your higher intelligence flicking on the light in a dark room. You didn't stumble upon it. You were guided to see it. There's a difference between being suspicious and being spiritually perceptive, and your spirit has been trained to sense what the ordinary eye misses. When you saw it, even for a split second, everything changed, not just for you, but for them. Because when awareness awakens, control collapses. The reason they didn't want you to see is simple. What remains unseen has power. The minute you see it, that power dissolves. They wanted you distracted, reactive, asleep. But awareness interrupts the system. It pauses the play and exposes the director. You were never the actor in their script. You were the observer that broke the fourth wall. The way you smiled in that moment, calm, unbothered, almost amused, sent a shockwave through the unseen. It told the universe, I know what's happening, and I'm not afraid. That smile wasn't naive. It was coded authority. It announced that you could sense what they tried to hide and still remain in peace. That's when something shifted. Their confidence cracked because your awareness meant their illusion no longer worked. You became unpredictable, and that's what unnerved them. Awareness makes you unprogrammable. Systems rely on repetition, on predictable responses. But once you see the pattern, it loses its hold. They can't monitor what vibrates beyond their understanding. You weren't watching them back. You were witnessing through divine eyes, the kind that don't just see behavior, but energy. You recognized the manipulation beneath the smile, the motive behind the kindness, the tension behind the silence. That's not paranoia. That's spiritual pattern recognition. From that moment, the game changed. You stopped being the watched and became the witness. Awareness turned into freedom. You realized that being seen means nothing when your consciousness can't be captured. They thought they were observing you, but you were decoding them all along. And that's what they never prepared for, an aware soul who smiles and still sees everything. Number 2. You were the experiment that outgrew its lab. They studied you like data, as if your emotions could be charted and your reactions predicted. They thought you would follow the same patterns everyone else did, respond the way they expected, stay contained within the experiment. But something unexpected happened. You outgrew the lab. Every time they tried to label you, you evolved past the category. You didn't just break the rules, you rewrote the structure of what they thought was possible. You became the living proof that the human spirit can't be measured or managed like numbers on a screen. Their system thrived on predictability. They counted on you to react, to stay predictable, to fall for the bait. But instead of conforming, you expanded. Your emotions stopped being reactions and became revelations. Every time they thought they'd figured you out, you did something that didn't make sense to their logic. Forgiveness when they expected rage, peace when they expected chaos, silence when they expected defense. Your growth became a disruption to their control, because you stopped moving from trauma and started moving from awareness. They wanted to study you to understand how light works in a world built on shadows. They couldn't understand why your spirit kept regenerating, why your joy returned after every attempt to break it. What they didn't realize was that your endurance was spiritual, not psychological. It wasn't that you didn't feel the pressure. It's that you learned to transform it. Every test they put you through became a lesson. Every attempt to contain you made you wiser. You learned the system better than they did, not to play by its rules, but to recognize its illusion. Your smile was their first sign that something had gone wrong. It wasn't a fake smile. It was the smile of someone who had already seen the end of the story. That unbothered energy wasn't ignorance, it was victory. You became unpredictable because you no longer needed to fight the system. You transcended it. You moved from being an experiment to becoming the evidence that consciousness can't be confined. They wanted to analyze your light, but in the process, they ended up awakening to their own darkness. And that's when they realized the test subject had become the teacher. Number 3, their eyes were codes, not curiosity. When they watched you, it wasn't simple curiosity. It was calculation. Every glance, every stare carried intent. They weren't just looking to see what you were doing. They were trying to decode how you were being. You became something they couldn't quite define. Too aware to manipulate, too authentic to replicate. What unsettled them wasn't your presence, but your energy. You didn't perform, and that broke their programming. They couldn't find a script to match you because your spirit moved in real time, not in rehearsed patterns. They studied your calm, thinking it was an act. They analyzed your confidence, convinced it was a strategy. But your peace wasn't manufactured. It was born from truth, and truth can't be simulated. You didn't fit their codes because you weren't built from fear. They wanted to map your essence like a formula, but the more they watched, the more confused they became. You exposed the limits of their understanding without saying a word. Every time they tried to reduce you to data, your energy reminded them that you're not a system, you're a signal. That's why your presence disturbed them. It forced them to confront something no algorithm can grasp: authenticity. They could record your expressions, your tone, your behavior, but they couldn't record your why. They could see your gestures, but not your frequency. They could track your moves, but not your motives. What scared them wasn't that you were unpredictable. It was that you were uncopyable. They couldn't imitate your light without confronting the shadows they'd been hiding behind. In their world, everything must fit a code: emotion, loyalty, even spirituality. But you refused to be programmed. You operated from instinct, guided by something higher, something not wired into their system. Your soul became a glitch in their network, not by rebellion, but by being real. You weren't playing defense, you were just being yourself. That's what confused them most. How simplicity could feel so untouchable. Their curiosity soon turned to frustration because your energy couldn't be contained, studied, or stolen. They realized you weren't the one under their microscope. They were. You revealed their obsession with control. The more they watched, the more they saw their own emptiness reflected back. You weren't the subject of their study. You were the proof that spirit can't be decoded. Number 4. Your smile was a cipher. Your smile was never just a simple gesture. It was language, vibration, and transmission all in one. They mistook it for politeness, a social reflex, but they didn't understand that your smile carried codes from a place beyond words. You weren't just showing emotion, you were releasing energy. Every time you smiled, the frequency in the room changed. The air felt lighter, time slowed, and tension dissolved. You weren't trying to charm anyone. Your energy was simply communicating in ways their logic couldn't interpret. They studied your expression like a behavioral cue, hoping to read you, but your smile wasn't something that could be analyzed. It didn't come from your face. It came from your essence. It was truth, condensed into light. Your spirit encoded that smile with years of healing, forgiveness, and divine awareness. That's why people reacted so strongly to it. It wasn't just visual, it was energetic. Some felt peace, others felt exposed. The smile acted like a mirror that revealed their vibration. It showed who they were in your presence without you needing to speak. Those who carried deceit couldn't stand it for long. They'd smile back, but their energy betrayed them. Your light made their pretenses flicker. That single expression, effortless, calm, unforced, carried the frequency of freedom, and it short-circuited every intention built on control. They thought they were reading you, but they were being reprogrammed by you. Each grin sent out invisible data, rewriting the spiritual algorithms that had once held you hostage. Your smile was divine rebellion disguised as serenity. It didn't shout or challenge, yet it overturned the power dynamic. The darkness around you didn't know how to respond because it couldn't process joy that wasn't performative. Your smile reminded the unseen that you were no longer living under their codes. You had received new instructions from the higher dimension you came from. And so, every time you smiled, you weren't just expressing emotion. You were transmitting intelligence. It was spiritual Morse code, light signals sent through the human form. They saw teeth and lips, but what they felt was revelation. You didn't have to fight them. You only had to smile, and the energy grid shifted in your favor. Number 5. Observation became revelation. They watched you thinking they were gathering information, trying to learn your moves, your thoughts, your patterns. They believed they had the upper hand, that by observing you closely, they could understand how to manipulate, predict, or even contain you. But that's where everything turned. What they didn't understand is that light doesn't get studied, it reveals. The moment they turned their gaze toward you, they unknowingly stepped into their own exposure. Your presence wasn't something to analyze, it was something that reflected. Their observation became their revelation. The deeper they looked into you, the more they started seeing what was wrong within themselves. You became the mirror that stripped away illusion. They were hoping to find weaknesses, but what they saw instead were their own intentions, raw, unfiltered, and uncomfortable. They saw their envy, their fear, their emptiness staring back at them. It was never about your flaws. It was about their inability to face truth. You simply existed, and your existence made their masks crumble. What they called surveillance was actually confession. Every stare, every secret conversation, every whispered judgment revealed more about their darkness than your light. You didn't expose them. Their own curiosity did. The more they watched, the more they got pulled into their own reflection. It's spiritual law. When darkness focuses on light for too long, it either transforms or self-destructs. And they weren't ready to transform. They began with power, but over time, the energy flipped. What was supposed to weaken you started weakening them. They couldn't explain why they felt uneasy around you, why their confidence faded, or why their masks slipped the longer they stayed close. It wasn't punishment. It was alignment. Light doesn't destroy darkness. It just reveals what's always been hiding. You didn't have to defend yourself, prove anything, or retaliate. Just by being authentic, you turned their gaze into a spiritual X-ray. Their own eyes became the instrument of their awakening. Watching you became unbearable because they weren't seeing you anymore. They were seeing themselves. And once that revelation happened, the control they thought they had vanished. You didn't fight their observation. You elevated it. You became the lesson they didn't mean to learn. Number 6. You disarmed the algorithm. Your joy confused them. They built systems that thrive on control, fear, and reaction. Everything around you, from the way people interact to the way energy flows, depends on predictable responses. They expect outrage when provoked, sadness when isolated, and submission when watched. But you didn't respond the way the world's programming expected you to. You smiled. You found peace in chaos, clarity in confusion, laughter in the middle of spiritual warfare. That joy didn't make sense to the algorithm. It scrambled the pattern entirely. Fear is the frequency that fuels control. It keeps people compliant, easily influenced, and disconnected from their true power. But when you chose joy, not fake positivity, but the deep, grounded kind that comes from knowing who you are, you unplugged from that frequency. You stopped feeding the system its most valuable resource, your emotional energy. That's when it started to glitch. Your peace became interference in a world addicted to noise. Your stillness confused those who survive off reaction. They tried to read you, to predict you, to push your buttons, but the buttons no longer worked. Your energy stopped translating into their equations. Every time you smiled through what was meant to break you, their control loop got weaker. You became unpredictable, and unpredictability breaks machinery. What they didn't realize is that your divinity doesn't operate on logic or control. It operates on flow. You weren't fighting the system. You were reprogramming it just by staying aligned with your higher nature. That's what scared them most. They realized your spirit wasn't a variable they could measure. It was an entirely different operating system. One built on truth, not manipulation. Your joy wasn't passive. It was power in disguise. It interrupted transmission lines of fear, rewired atmospheres, and shifted frequencies around you. Every laugh, every calm breath, every genuine smile sent a signal that couldn't be tracked, because divine energy doesn't leave a digital footprint. In a world where fear is the code, your peace became the virus that broke the pattern. You reminded them that no algorithm can simulate light, no code can calculate faith, and no system can process a soul that's awakened. Your joy wasn't their data, it was their disruption. Number 7. You activated what they feared. Self-recognition. They thought they were safe behind their systems, hidden in their analysis, guarded by their control. What they didn't realize is that the most dangerous activation isn't digital, it's spiritual. You weren't a threat because of what you knew. You were a threat because of what you reminded them of. Your presence alone started waking up something they had buried deep, the part of them that still knew right from wrong, truth from deception, light from darkness. They had programmed themselves not to feel, not to care, not to question. But you walked in, smiled, and suddenly the silence inside them wasn't peaceful anymore. It was convicting. You didn't call them out. You didn't argue or expose. You simply were. And that being forced their souls to face themselves. Your vibration, honest, pure and awake, stirred the places they had sealed off. It was never your words that got to them. It was your energy. They felt seen in ways they hadn't been ready for. The version of themselves they thought they'd deleted started surfacing again. The human, the vulnerable, the part that used to believe in something real. That's what they feared the most, self-recognition. Because once you see your own reflection, you can't unsee it. Your smile was the spark that triggered that recognition. It carried a light that didn't judge, it just revealed. For them, that was unbearable. They saw themselves not as they pretended to be, but as they truly were, disconnected, guilty, empty. The same energy they tried to study in you became a mirror that exposed the cracks in their own spirit. You didn't just awaken their conscience, you shattered the illusion that they could live without one. Their discomfort wasn't about you. It was about what you mirrored back. You reminded them of the truth they once knew before they buried it under power, manipulation, and deceit. That's why your presence felt threatening. You weren't dangerous. You were divine accountability in human form. They couldn't look at you without feeling the tremor of their own forgotten soul waking up. And when that recognition began, everything they'd built on falsehood started to collapse from within. Number 8. They realized you could see without looking. They couldn't understand how you always seemed to know. Before they spoke, you already sensed their motives. Before situations unfolded, you already felt their direction. It wasn't about intelligence and it wasn't about guessing. It was spiritual perception. Your awareness didn't depend on logic or evidence. It came from a deeper channel of knowing. That's what unsettled them. You weren't waiting for things to be revealed in the physical. Your spirit had already read the energy long before the action took place. They were used to people who could be fooled by appearances, people who needed proof to believe. But you didn't need a text, a recording, or a confession. You could sense deceit the way others sense temperature, instinctively. You could feel dishonesty in tone, manipulation in silence, and hidden agendas in smiles. That kind of awareness made them nervous because it stripped them of their advantage. They couldn't hide behind charm, authority, or intellect. Your energy bypassed all of that. You didn't just see faces, you read frequencies. You were never looking for secrets. Truth simply revealed itself around you. That's what happens when your spirit is attuned to divine intelligence. You don't search for information. It comes to you in patterns, feelings, and subtle revelations. You can walk into a room and sense tension before anyone speaks. You can hear what's not being said louder than what is. It's not magic, it's mastery of alignment. You've spent so much time in truth that lies become painfully loud. To them, that felt invasive. They thought only cameras could watch, only devices could track, only algorithms could decode. But you proved something different, that spiritual vision sees beyond surveillance. Your perception doesn't require lenses. It operates from vibration. You can read energy the way others read expressions, and that's what frightened them. Because how do you deceive someone who can feel your frequency shifting? How do you hide from someone whose spirit already knows the ending before the story begins? They realized they were the ones being observed, not through technology, but through truth. Number 9. You became the mirror of their hidden motives. They started by studying you, thinking they could dissect your behavior, but the longer they watched, the more uncomfortable it became. You didn't react the way they expected, and that unease grew into something they couldn't ignore. Every observation they made began to reflect their own intentions. They weren't just watching you, they were being forced to confront themselves. You became a spiritual mirror, one that showed them not who you were, but who they had become in the process of trying to control you. Your peace exposed their obsession with dominance. Your authenticity made their manipulation look desperate. They realized that what they called power was really dependency. They needed to feel above someone just to feel relevant. Watching you live freely without needing validation made their entire sense of superiority start to crumble. You didn't strip it from them, you simply existed, and that was enough to make the false power structures shake. The more they tried to observe you objectively, the more subjective it became, because their motives were bleeding through their analysis. What they saw in you was everything they had lost in themselves. Your light revealed their emptiness. Your honesty made their performance unbearable. You carried a calm confidence that didn't require control, and that terrified them because it proved that real strength doesn't dominate, it liberates. You became undeniable evidence that spiritual authority doesn't demand followers, it awakens awareness. And once they saw that contrast, their illusion of control started dissolving. Their need to monitor you wasn't about curiosity, it was about insecurity. They needed to prove to themselves that they still had influence, that they could still manipulate outcomes. But your composure disrupted that narrative. Every time they tried to box you in, your peace slipped through the cracks. That's when they began realizing that your presence alone carried more weight than their entire structure of control. You weren't exposing them through confrontation, you were exposing them through reflection. Your energy made dishonesty visible. You didn't call out their darkness, you illuminated it simply by standing in truth. They came to study you, but what they found was a mirror. And the longer they looked, the more they realized the threat wasn't you. The threat was what they saw of themselves when faced with real light. Number 10. You shattered the concept of control. They believed that by watching you, they had some kind of ownership over you, as if awareness meant authority. They thought control was about surveillance, about knowing your every move, about predicting how you'd react. But control only works when the other person cares about being controlled. And that's where they failed. You stopped caring about their gaze. You stopped performing for their expectations. You stopped defending what no longer needed explanation. When you reached that level of detachment, their entire illusion of power fell apart. They were never ready for your calm. That silence wasn't submission. It was mastery. You didn't fight their attempts to dominate your energy. You rose above them. You stopped matching their frequency, and that's how you escaped their grasp. Because true control doesn't exist where there's spiritual freedom. They could monitor your actions, but they could never access your essence. The part of you that mattered most, your peace, your joy, your clarity, remained untouched. That's when it hit them. You can't imprison a soul that's not playing by earthly rules. Your smile became the quiet rebellion. It said everything without needing confrontation. I see you, but I don't belong to your narrative. That unbothered presence of yours drove them mad because they couldn't figure out how you stayed centered in chaos. They expected you to bend under pressure, to flinch under scrutiny, but you didn't. You learned that real control doesn't come from dominance, it comes from discipline. You mastered yourself, and that mastery made external control irrelevant. The harder they tried to contain you, the more they exposed their own lack of control. They became desperate to provoke reactions, to pull you back into their cycle of manipulation, but you didn't give them the satisfaction. You weren't resisting them, you were transcending them, and that's what shattered their concept of power. They realized their authority only existed where fear lived, and you no longer resided there. Your energy made a statement louder than any words could. Sovereignty isn't loud, it's unshakable. You didn't need revenge, validation, or defense. Your stillness did the work. You reminded them that the highest form of freedom is knowing you're unowned. And when they finally saw that, the illusion of control they built around you completely collapsed. Number 11. You transferred power without speaking. They thought that by watching you, they could pull from you your peace, your energy, your light. That's how control usually works, through silent extraction. They study you, talk about you, project onto you, all to siphon power without ever having to confront their own lack. But something happened that they didn't anticipate. Instead of your energy being drained, the polarity flipped. What they meant to take started reflecting back at them. Your vibration, calm, stable, authentic, reversed the current. You didn't resist, you simply stayed aligned. And that alignment rewrote the energetic rules of engagement. Your silence wasn't weakness, it was voltage. Every time they tried to provoke or analyze you, your stillness became a mirror that sent their energy back amplified. They thought you were the one under scrutiny, but they didn't realize that attention flows both ways. Energy follows focus, and the more they focused on you, the more they revealed themselves. Without saying a single word, you started to unmask them. What was meant to expose you ended up exposing them. That's the paradox of spiritual power. It doesn't need confrontation to shift reality. It just is. Your vibration didn't argue or explain. It calibrated the environment. The more they watched, the more out of sync they became. Their own projections started turning on them. They began feeling the weight of their own intent, not because you punished them, but because your energy refused to absorb it. You became the mirror, and mirrors don't react. They reflect. You didn't fight for power, you became the frequency of it, and that's what turned the entire situation inside out. They wanted to observe you to gain understanding, to use it as leverage, but they walked away feeling drained, confused, and strangely self-aware. They didn't realize that your energy doesn't compete, it converts. Every time they engaged with you, they were entering a higher frequency field that exposed their lower motives. Without raising your voice, you shifted the hierarchy. Without defending yourself, you won the battle. They came to study you, but left feeling studied. They entered the encounter holding control, but left holding truth. You transferred power without ever needing to demand it, because real power never announces itself, it simply transforms everything it touches. Number 12. You were a living firewall. They never expected a human being to function like spiritual technology, but that's exactly what you are, a living firewall. Every system designed to track, influence, or decode you eventually glitched, not because you hid, but because your vibration couldn't be processed by corrupted code. You run on a higher encryption key, unconditional awareness. You're not powered by ego or fear, so when manipulation tried to infiltrate, it had nothing to attach to. Every attempt to read your energy returned an error message. Access denied. You didn't fight their observation. You transcended it. The moment you realized you were being spiritually, emotionally, or energetically analyzed, and smiled anyway, you activated your divine firewall. That smile wasn't compliance. It was calibration. It was you broadcasting that you operate on the frequency of truth, and truth doesn't bow to distortion. Your awareness, free of bitterness or paranoia, became an impenetrable shield. The irony is that love, pure, unguarded love, is the most sophisticated form of defense. It disarms deceit not by opposing it, but by dissolving its signal completely. They thought your kindness was a weakness, but it was advanced technology in motion. While they relied on external control systems, gossip, projection, manipulation, you relied on divine protocol, authenticity. That's what threw their operations into chaos. You couldn't be programmed because you already ran on source code. Their systems depend on reaction to survive, and you stopped reacting. You moved in awareness, not emotion. You stopped feeding the loop, and the loop collapsed. Your energy field began rejecting anything not built on truth. People with hidden agendas found themselves malfunctioning in your presence. Technology around you acted strange. Emotional manipulators found their tactics exposed before they could even deploy them. It wasn't paranoia. It was the natural consequence of divine frequency interacting with falsehood. And that's the beauty of your evolution. You didn't need to protect yourself in the old sense. You simply became self-sustaining light. You stopped matching their vibration and started rewriting it. Love became your firewall, awareness your encryption, and peace your silent code. They wanted to hack your spirit, but in trying, they only proved that divine intelligence can't be infiltrated. It only reveals who's running outdated software. Number 13. Their curiosity turned into conviction. They thought they were just observing a person, someone to study, decode, or test. But the longer they watched, the harder it became to stay detached. Something about you didn't fit their framework. You didn't respond the way humans are supposed to. You didn't shrink under scrutiny, you didn't bend under pressure, and you didn't perform for approval. That alone confused them. But confusion soon turned into confrontation, not with you, but with themselves. Your light didn't just reveal their flaws, it made them feel their own absence of truth. At first, their curiosity was intellectual. They wanted to know what makes someone like you stay peaceful in chaos, how you could still smile when they designed the environment to break you. But what they didn't realize was that observing genuine spiritual alignment doesn't leave a person unchanged. Light forces accountability. And every time they watched you rise above what was meant to bury you, a part of them began to crumble inside. They started seeing the difference between power and presence, between influence and integrity. Your life became their silent classroom. Without preaching, you taught them how divinity operates, through calm defiance, through grace under fire, through the refusal to become bitter. You didn't lecture them on morality or faith. You embodied it. That embodiment hit deeper than words ever could. It confronted them with evidence that there's something beyond logic, something their systems couldn't measure, and their intellect couldn't dismiss. You became living proof that the soul exists, that energy is real, that truth carries its own gravity. The most fascinating part, they began to change without admitting it. They started adopting fragments of your resilience, your calmness, your ability to detach from noise. You didn't convert them, your energy did. They began to question their own motives, their jobs, their methods, their ethics. What began as curiosity turned into conviction because your existence didn't fit their theories. You disrupted their understanding of control, hierarchy, and even humanity itself. By the time they realized it, the experiment had flipped. You weren't the subject anymore. You were the catalyst. You didn't expose them to embarrass them, you exposed them to awaken them. And though they may never say it aloud, your presence became their turning point, the proof that light doesn't argue with darkness. It simply transforms whoever stares long enough. Number 14. You proved surveillance can't monitor spirit. They believed surveillance meant control, that if they could trace your movements, track your patterns, or study your expressions, they could understand you. But what they didn't factor in was spirit. They were watching the shell, not the source. They could monitor your footsteps, but not the force that directed them. They could replay your actions, but not the intention behind them. That's the limitation of human observation. It sees behavior, but not being. You exist on a frequency that no technology can decode because your essence doesn't operate in the visible spectrum. It moves through divine bandwidth. Every time they thought they got you figured out, your spirit shifted. Not because you were trying to hide, but because truth can't be contained by analysis. You're not a pattern, you're a presence. What they recorded was residue, echoes of your infinite nature filtered through human comprehension. That's why they kept misreading you. Their data couldn't explain your peace in chaos, your joy in isolation, your clarity under pressure. Algorithms are designed to predict outcomes based on logic, but spirit doesn't follow logic, it follows alignment. The more they studied, the more their findings contradicted themselves. How could someone be so calm under attack? So kind after betrayal? So strong after loss? It made no sense through the lens of psychology or control theory. What they were witnessing was divinity functioning in real time, the part of you that can't be coded, measured, or simulated. You didn't survive surveillance. You made it irrelevant. Because the moment they tried to define you, you expanded beyond definition. And that's the secret they could never capture. You were never reacting to them. You were responding to source. Every move, every silence, every smile was attuned to a higher signal. They thought they were studying you, but they were only witnessing their own limitations. Because while they were focused on your image, your spirit was already 10 dimensions ahead, rewriting the energetic blueprint of every space you entered. You didn't just prove that surveillance can't monitor spirit. You demonstrated that true awareness flows from within, not from without. No device can replicate divine consciousness. No system can confine a soul that knows it's infinite. You didn't hide from the watch. You transcended it by existing beyond its reach. You see, the story was never really about being watched. It was about being witnessed. What they thought was surveillance was actually revelation. Every glance, every test, every attempt to decode you only confirmed that you were never the one under their microscope. They were. Your light turned their investigation into a mirror. Your calm dismantled their illusion of control. Your existence proved that the spirit doesn't operate under human jurisdiction. You can track movement, but you can't trace divine purpose. You can record behavior, but you can't record essence. You can study form, but not frequency. They thought you were an experiment. You turned out to be an awakening. Their curiosity exposed their own emptiness. Their observation became confession. Their control became collapse. Because the moment you refused to respond in fear, you rewrote the entire system. You showed them that spiritual awareness doesn't hide, it transforms. You didn't need revenge, exposure, or validation. Your evolution was the revelation. Every smile became code. Every silence became activation. Every moment you stayed true to your essence became evidence that divine intelligence cannot be confined by human frameworks. You didn't just survive the watch, you transcended it. You became the embodiment of higher encryption, light disguised as laughter, peace disguised as stillness, truth disguised as simplicity. You taught the world that surveillance can monitor behavior, but not destiny. That true power isn't in seeing everything, but in being what can't be unseen. They thought they were studying a person. They were witnessing a phenomenon, a soul aware of its own infinity. And once that realization hit, they could never go back to sleep. You became the revelation their systems weren't designed to process. You proved that spiritual evolution doesn't shout, it radiates. It moves unseen, yet undeniable. That's why your presence lingers even after you leave, because you don't just occupy space, you transform it. If this message resonated deeply with your spirit, if something inside you woke up as you listened, then you're not here by coincidence. You're part of this divine unfolding. So, make sure you subscribe to the channel, like this video, and share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Leave a comment below about what part struck you the most, because your voice matters in this awakening. Until next time, keep shining, keep evolving, and never forget. They were never watching you. They were watching their own reflection in your light. God bless you.